Hey there everyone, and welcome back to Europe in Detail, where we are currently building Venice 1-to-1. I am very excited about this episode because we get to build the Rialto Bridge. This is a very famous bridge within Venice, if not the most famous, and contains some really cool things. Number one is its sheer beauty. I mean, look at it, it's magnificent. Number two, it's a really densely populated area around here with a lot going on. And number three, the bridge has got shops on it. I think that's so cool, and we're going to try and recreate that within game. So let's not muck about, let's start with the bridge itself, and I was lucky enough to find one on the workshop, and this is really easy to find if you happen to be looking for it. Just type in Rialto Bridge, and like magic, there it is. Anyway, we need to talk about this bridge. You could imagine my surprise and my delight at finding this on the workshop. This is just brilliant, and to be honest, I was preparing myself to create this bridge from scratch with props. I was also really pleased to find out that I only had to scale it up very slightly to fit the map, which to me sort of shows me that I got the size of the map reasonably close. So getting technical a little bit, I'll change the bridge over to procedural objects and then change the scale of a couple of things. Then I'll use Google Maps or Google Earth to make sure that the bridge is sort of installed in the right location with the right angle to it. So I figured we couldn't just do the bridge without doing the surrounding area, so we're also going to do a good sized block on either side of the Grand Canal. And I'm going to be really taking my time and trying my hardest to get these buildings as close to the real life model as possible. This is most certainly going to be one of those areas where we don't hold back anywhere. So some of you guys might also be wondering why I've jumped all the way over to the Rialto Bridge in the middle of nowhere. I was sort of making my way from one side of the map to the other. But to cut a long story short, it got boring. I was sort of desperate to do one of these more well-known areas, and I think I may continue along with this trend as well and just sort of fill the blocks in off camera, or at least the sort of less prominent ones. And that's really only for one reason. There's just so many of them. There's so many buildings, and a lot of them are just placed in the middle of nowhere. Once I've placed them, I never really go back and look at them. I'm always looking at the more interesting and detailed areas with a little bit more going on. Places like the train station and ferry stops and things like that. So yeah, I mean, those less detailed blocks can get very monotonous after a while, and once you've seen me place one, you've seen me place them all. So let's pull up Google Earth here and have a look at what I'm building. We've got a pretty large mix of buildings here along the very edge of the Grand Canal. They're tall, short, different colours, there's a lot going on, and some of these buildings to me look large, like really large and iconic. And this building right here is one of them. Directly behind the Rialto Bridge is this big, beautiful, almost perfectly square white building with a big terraced roof with, it looks like solar panels on it. Now if I've got absolutely any shot of pulling this off in any degree whatsoever, I need to get these buildings as close as I possibly can. Especially these more iconic ones, or recognisable ones. And if they happen to also be on the edge of the Grand Canal, like this one is, then they're really going to get the treatment, because as you guys know, if you've been following the series, any buildings that are on the edge of the Grand Canal are going to get lots and lots of detail. So to create this building here, I didn't really have anything that could work, so I've decided to make it from scratch. I used a Mediterranean university, but unfortunately when I PO the building, the roof disappears. But fortunately, I have a prop roof, so I have to turn that to procedural objects as well and shape that to fit. That took a little bit of work, but most of the work is in the front bit here where it meets the canal. It's got this sort of a cutout bit that's held up with these arches, and there looks to be like a little pier with direct access into the canal itself. So with a bit of prop concrete and a couple of arches, we can sort of try and recreate this. Next we're going to carry on directly adjacent to that building, and we've got more of those white facade plastered buildings here. A couple of these buildings even look like they've either been freshly painted or freshly rendered, so I'm trying to catch that crisp new look with these ones as well. And I was also pleased that the roof didn't disappear on this one this time. So in regards to the placement of these buildings, I'm trying to create a little alleyway between them that's coming directly off the Rialto Bridge, and it's important to get this orientated in the right direction. Next I'm going to make my way down the edge of the canal, and these buildings change quite a bit. You can see the colour and the angle varies quite a bit, and the closer we are to the bridge, the more time I'm spending on them to get them right. So most of the buildings that are getting placed right on the edge of the Grand Canal will have to be changed to procedural objects. This will straight away eliminate the terrain underneath the building so that it doesn't mess with the water in the Grand Canal. This of course takes away the functionality of the building, but this isn't actually a problem because this gives me the opportunity to slip cube services in here to bring that functionality back, and it also gives me the flexibility of putting in a commercial space or maybe an office building to satisfy some demand. But most of the time I'm just slipping in residential cubes, and I've got levels 1 through 5, and it's important to put an even amount of each in. I made the mistake in my last city of putting all level 5s, and to cut a long story short, uneducated people just had nowhere to live. So the next building you're seeing me work on here is another one that looks pretty iconic to me. It stands out for sure against the buildings that surround it, and it's also got this cool archway sort of space that's at the front of the building that allows the pedestrians to walk through and under the building. To make things a little bit more tricky, there's also a very narrow water canal right next to the building. So this is going to be another one of those very custom made buildings. I'm going to use procedural objects and a number of different buildings, merge them all together to try and make this work. So speaking of buildings, I've actually been in touch with a couple of really good asset creators on the Steam workshop and basically offered them a commission to make some buildings for the series, so we'll see how we go with that. In fact, one of the things that I've been working on with Blue Thunder is going to be unveiled in this episode, so stay tuned for that. It's pretty cool. So what you're seeing me do at the moment is use a new functionality that I found within procedural objects. It probably isn't new, but I've only just found it now, but it's called the distort function, and this is really cool because it just gives up 4 points on each corner of the building, and you can just drag those in or out and distort the overall shape of the building without having to go into the customization function. This has been massive for this series and a real time saver. Here I'm going to extend out my magnificent roading network so that we can get some people coming over here. If you're new to the series, I'm using underground roads to have the city function properly, but obviously have those roads out of view. And those roads are just going to pop up every now and then into a large cluster of buildings in the form of a cul-de-sac that will act as a service point for that city block. Pretty savage and certainly unconventional, but it works. So next I want to extend all of the things over that we need in the way of water and power, and just to get this area functioning really, because I want to start placing down the pedestrian pathways that go up and over the Rialto Bridge. And to do this accurately, it's much easier to have the people walking on the paths so that you can see exactly what's happening. And those pathways in this area are going to be very intricate. I want people walking on all parts of the bridge. I want them walking everywhere that they do in real life. And I've got to say, I'm really excited. I know this is going to work. I've done similar builds before, but I'm just really looking forward to this area being super busy. I guess the ultimate for me with this area would be to have people comment that have been there in real life and maybe can see the similarities within my build. It's actually a really crazy paradox that I know so much about Venice from this build and I've never been there. In fact, I was talking to a friend the other day that had been to Venice, and it was almost as if I knew more about the place than they did, which we both genuinely laughed at. But please, by all means, if you've been to Venice in real life, and in particular the Rialto Bridge, I would love to hear a comment from you. So at this point, all of the paths are set into place and I'm just waiting for people to come over and check the area out. So now I want to start putting the surfaces down on the bridge and start detailing it a little more closely. Now, looking back at this, for the life of me, I don't know why I've put a flat stone surface down, because it's actually stairs. And eventually I will do that. And one of the other issues that I had with the bridge was the handrail or the balustrade has not been scaled properly. It's actually massive. It's like up to the chins of the citizens, whereas in real life it's sort of waist height. So I tried with procedural objects or in particular the customization function, and tried to bring the handrail sort of down a little bit, but it was so intricate and tricky to do that what I've actually decided to do is bring the surface of the bridge up a little higher and then just try and make the handrail look like it's half as tall. So that's going to mean that I'm going to have to put some sort of a prop on the outside of the bridge to hide the bottom half of that handrail. And this is certainly not ideal, but it doesn't change the overall aesthetics of the bridge that much. So next I want to start getting the ferry services into place. There's a pretty prominent looking ferry stop right here in front of the bridge, and I'm going to use the ferry path functionality within game to hook this up with our stops outside the train station. So the area is starting to come to life. We've got people walking around and stuff now, so let's detail the bridge a little bit more closely again. The lower part of the bridge, in particular the way the stairs are set out, is quite tricky. There's stairs going at 90-degree angles, there's buildings, there's cavities within buildings, there's pathways. It's really going to be quite tricky to build. So let's start with the basics. We want to put the surfaces down and get the stairs in place. After that, we'll move on to things like handrails, and I want these to match the bridge as closely as possible. These need to look like a natural extension of the bridge. There's a couple of buildings here that look very particular as well. I mentioned the cavity within the building earlier, and the building here directly on the corner is exactly what I'm talking about. It has some big stone archways at the front of it, and some of them contain shops and some of them don't. Some of them are just open. I'm going to use procedural objects on this particular building to try and make it look like a corner building. The building that I'm using has natural archways built into it. I believe it's from Armesto, but they've changed colour when I've changed the colour of the facade. So what I'm going to do is install my own white arches that are closely mimicking his ones. This will allow me to change the colour. It's a slight off-white, or if you want to be really fancy, you could call it Bianca. Yeah, that sounds fancy. But again, these buildings right by the Grand Canal, right by the Rialto Bridge, are gonna get the treatment. This building actually extends right around the corner and goes a long way. It's actually a very, very large building, but I'm just gonna stick with this front part of it for now and get these shops in the right place. I've got these little wee buildings that have got like glass frontages on them that look like little wee like clothing shops or cafes that I can slip into these existing buildings. I'll put them in wherever these shops are in real life, and then I can move on to things like awnings. These three shops here in particular have those green awnings above them that we see in a lot of other spots in Venice. I'm being sure to change the colour of those awnings very slightly to make them look like they've been damaged by the sun, or maybe some have been replaced and are a bit newer than others. And with that, this sort of corner of the bridge is done, or at least for now. I'll come back and add way more props later, but this is the main stuff done. So now I'll just whip around to another side of the bridge and do the same thing basically. So there's a big open courtyard or a piazza here in real life, and I found this really cool little like well prop on the Steam Workshop, and you find these almost in every one of these little plazas. At first I thought it was to control the flooding, but it's in fact to store drinking water. So thanks to you guys for pointing that out to me. Now there's also a church in this area, and it's on a very peculiar angle. It doesn't line up with any of the surrounding buildings, and this gives me an opportunity to put a real working church in here and not have to change it to procedural objects. So this is actually going to function in-game as a tourist attraction, and I can rename it the real church that it is in real life. In-game I'm just using an old church. I think it's from Xerix, but it's from Rome, but that's close enough. So next I'm going to spend a bit of time putting more of those shops in. There is lots and lots of them around here. So I'll put a road down, put a whole lot of shops along that road, and then just drag them over into position to suit. I'm going to hide a road in this building eventually, so all of these buildings are going to stay functioning within game, with the spawn points for those buildings just wound back inside the building. And with that now done, we can finish this end of the bridge, and it's really tricky. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have stairs here going in sort of different directions, and some of them don't line up. And then of course I've got to manipulate the pathways as well so that they're sitting on the stairs in the right spot. I want the people to be walking as close to the stairs as I can get, and then I'll finish this area off with like an old tile white balustrade around the stairs. So now we are really going to go to town with the detailing on the Rialto Bridge. In real life, there's actual shops on the bridge that run up the middle, and I'm going to use those buildings that I mentioned earlier, the little shop fronts with procedural objects. I'm going to manipulate them to the right size and squeeze them all up on this bridge. I want to make it look like there's a different shop in each one of these little glass archways, and in the end I even put commercial cube services within these shops to get them functioning in the game. So you'll see me here put down a selection of those little glass buildings, and using procedural objects I'm going to make them really narrow. One of the buildings is a really cool souvenir shop, and it's got like photo stands or whatever out the front, so I'm going to try and keep those as well. But one by one I'll transfer these over onto the Rialto Bridge and put them in as carefully as I can. Sticking true to the real life model here, we're going to finish these shop fronts off with some awnings, and they're changed to that nice off-white colour. I'll do one side of the bridge and then copy it over to the other side, and then finally copy the complete side over to the opposite side of the bridge. This saves me having to put the awnings down one by one. And when this is done, wow, this looks really cool. I can't wait to see this finished with heaps of people on it. So there's one more thing I want to do to the bridge before we move on to the next bit, and that's make it into a functioning park space within game. I found a floating or raisable people generator in the Steam workshop, so I'm going to put that right on the very arch of the bridge so that people can actually come and visit just the bridge. I'll rename the park area the Rialto Bridge in real life, so I'll be able to tell when people are coming to the city to visit the Rialto Bridge, which I think is pretty cool. I hope you guys are enjoying the lovely elevator music, but as you've seen there, we put down two pretty big blocks either side of the Grand Canal. This was always going to be the case when I build the bridge because I want to build the entire area in one go. And now with all of those buildings down, we can focus on really adding some detail. When using Google Earth to view this area, you actually get the choice to go down into Street View, and the Street View takes you right on to the edge of the Grand Canal. I've been using this method for the past couple of weeks to walk up and down the edge of the Grand Canal here, and this is going to help me get the detail in this area spot on. Things like where the restaurants are situated and what does the facade of the building look like, but also small things like what sort of table and chairs are they using, what colour are the fences around these areas, do they have flowers on the fences? Some of them do, some of them don't. What type of lighting do they have? So all of these little things are going to add up to a pretty authentic build, I think. And again, I'd really love to hear from anybody who's sat down and had a meal at any of these restaurants. Some of the other things I'll put in this area are lots of little private piers, there's lots of boats along the waterfront, there's lots of piles and places to tie your boat up with. There's also areas here where it looks like you can hire a gondola from. And speaking of gondolas, the thing that me and Blue Thunder have been working on is we now have a gondola as a ferry in the game. It's actually moving people around, which is brilliant. Blue Thunder tried to animate the little paddler on the back, but it was too much work, so we just have to deal with that, and to be honest, that's not a problem at all. I didn't expect that to be animated, so yep, we finally have gondolas working in the city, which is cool. If you guys don't know who Blue Thunder is, I highly recommend you go check him out on the Steam Workshop. He's done lots of stuff, including all of his ride assets that $2.20 uses a lot of. So you're going to see those little gondolas going to and from here in a few of these shots. I don't think I could be happier with this area. This is probably one of the best things I think I've ever built in the game. It's certainly been the most enjoyable thing I've built recently. If you guys have been waiting for this episode with the Rialto Bridge, then I hope this has been interesting for you. I also want to take just a moment to apologise for the lack of uploads recently. My work's gotten really busy, and this particular build here has actually taken a lot longer than I thought it would. I would prefer to slow up and do things to a higher standard than try and pump stuff out that's really piss weak. It's not my style. But anyway, I'm hoping to get a little bit more regular again shortly, and I hope to see you guys on those future episodes. So take it easy guys, look after each other, look after yourselves, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.